with respect to matters before the Environmental Management Commission's Groundwater and Waste Management Committee. If any member knows of a conflict of interest or appearance of conflict, please so state at this time. Hearing none, I'll go ahead and do the roll calls. Is Steve Keen on the line?
Yes.
Is David Anderson on the line?
Yes.
Is Shannon Arata on the line?
Yes.
Jenny Calvington?
Yes.
Dr. Suzanne Lazorek?
Yes.
Thank you. The next item is the approval of the meeting summary minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review them? Are there any changes or comments to the meeting summary minutes? I had no comments or changes to them. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve the minutes. It's Commissioner Arata.
Do I have a second?
This is David. I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing no opposition, we'll approve the minutes. Now we're going to move on to the action items part of the agenda. The first item is a request approval to proceed to the Environmental Management Commission for public notice and hearing on amendments to 15A NCAC 13B rules for C&D and MSW landfill facilities and the regulatory impact analysis. Sherry Stanley is listed as the presenter.
All right. Good morning, Chairman Bailey, Commissioners. Let me get my screen shared here. Okay. Let's see. Move a few things away. Okay. So I'm Sherry Stanley, and I head up the permitting branch of the Division of Waste Management Solid Waste Section. And the division is here today to request approval from the Groundwater and Waste Management Committee to proceed to the Environmental Management Commission for public notice and hearing for amendments to parts of the C&D and MSW landfill rules and the associated regulatory impact analysis. The rules were proposed for amendment, establish requirements for, I'm sorry, let me start again. The rules proposed for amendment establish requirements for permit, I need to move this. Here. Permit application requirements and for groundwater monitoring, assessment, and corrective action for C&D and MSW landfill facilities. The rules were originally adopted by EMC in July 2020 and approved by the Rules Review Commission in October of that same year. The Rules Review Commission received over 10 letters of objection to a subset of the rules in the readoptive rule package, and the rules were sent for legislative review. The division then requested the Rules Division to delay the effective dates of all the rules in the readoptive rule package to be the same as the rules sent back for legislative review. Senate Bill 60 was filed in the General Assembly in February of 2021, and this bill was intended to disapprove several sections of the rules that received letters of objection. The division worked with stakeholders to draft a revised bill that did not disapprove any of the rules, but instead made the readopted rules effective when the session law became effective. The revised bill, which was agreed upon between the division and stakeholders, also required that the rules be implemented with the changes described in section 1C of the session law, and that the rules listed in the law be amended to substantively identical to the session law's implementation section. Senate Bill 60 was ratified as Session Law 2021-153 in September 16th of 2021. Copy of that law was included in Attachment C. Per the session law, all of the readoptive rules in 15A NCAC 13B.0531 through .0547 and Section 1600 for C&D and MSW landfills were added to the administrative code in September 2021. The session law states that amendments are not subject to review by the RRC and shall become effective as though 10 or more written objections have been received as provided in the general statutes. And this means that the rule amendments are automatically subject to legislative review. The division has been implementing Section 1C of the session law since it became effective in September. The division is proposing to make the required amendments to these rules, which are substantively identical to the session law implementation. The division is also proposing additional amendments to make minor technical corrections because of typos that we found in the rule. The permit application rule requirements are proposed for amendment to reduce the application requirement for changes in ownership or corporate structure, and also for issuance of closure permits. The regulated community will not be required to resubmit any documents that had been previously submitted to the division. The division will issue the permits for closure and post-closure at the time of closure, and will incorporate plans that were already approved in the most recent permit to operate for the facility. If the owner or operator want to make any changes, they can submit a permit modification request to the division. The groundwater monitoring, assessment, and corrective action amendments are proposed to remove the references to the interim maximum allowable concentrations in 15A NCA 2L that had been added to the rules during the readoption process. The addition of those IMAC references was intended only for clarification purposes and would not have changed the way the division enforced the requirements of 2L. So removal of these references will not change the division's enforcement of 2L, and we will continue to enforce the 2L requirements as we did prior to readoption. The regulatory impact analysis was approved by OSBM on November 16th, 2021, and indicated that no fiscal note was necessary because the proposed amendments will have little to no impacts on the regulated community, local government, or state government, and will have no substantial economic impact. And this is based on the following. The changes reflected in the substantive rule amendments were implemented directly by Session Law 2021-153, Section 1C. The division has been complying with the changes of the session law since effective date of September 16th, 2021. The session law implementation remains effective until the rules are amended, and the amendments are either substantively identical to the implementation in Section 1C of the law or are just minor technical corrections. The regulatory impact analysis provides a brief overview of the expected impacts of the session law for information purposes only. Any impacts from the changes to the application requirements or removal of the IMAC references are impacts from implementation of the session law and are not the result of the proposed amendments. Here's our proposed rulemaking schedule. We're here today to get approval of the rule text and the regulatory impact analysis to go before the EMC. We're hoping to get approval to take the rule and regulatory impact analysis to public comment on March 10th meeting of the EMC, with a public comment period April 18th through June 17th of this year, with the earliest hearing date of May 3rd. We hope to get approval and adopt the rules July 14th. Go to OAH late July, and then the proposed effective date of the rule would be pending the legislative review. So the requested action today, the division is requesting approval to proceed to the Environmental Management Commission for public notice and hearing on amendments to 15A NCAC 13B rules for C&D and MSW landfill facilities as included in attachments A and B in the regulatory impact analysis. I'll take any questions if anybody has anything.
Thank you, Sherry. I'll go through the members of the committee and ask if they have any questions. Steve Keen.
Madam Chair, I do not have any questions at this time.
Thank you. David Anderson,
No questions.
Shannon Arata,
No questions.
Jenny Kelvington,
Questions.
Dr. Suzanne Lazorek,
No questions. Thank you.
and I had received a notice that from J.D. Solomon that he wouldn't be attending, and I'm just confirming that he's not on the line. I didn't mean to skip over him. Okay. Hearing no questions, do I have a motion to request approval to proceed to the EMC on this item?
Madam Chair, Steve King, I go ahead and move that we approve to proceed to the EMC for the public notice and hearing of these amendments.
Thank you, Commissioner Keen. Do I have a second?
This is David. I second.
Thank you. I'm going through the roll call again. Commissioner Keen, do you approve?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Approve.
Commissioner Arata?
Approve.
Commissioner Kelvington?
Approve.
The motion passes. Thank you.
Commissioner Lazorek approves also.
Oh, I missed that? I'm sorry. Thank you. So it's unanimous.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stanley. The next item on the agenda is to request approval to proceed to the EMC for public notice and hearing on amendments to 15A NCAC 02P Commercial Leaking Petroleum Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Fund and the regulatory impact analysis. Wayne Randolph will be presenting this item to us today.
Hi, good morning. I'm getting my screen. Oh. Okay. Can everyone see that?
I can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Bailey, members of the committee. Today, I'm presenting readoption and amendments to 15A NCAC 2P. The Division of Waste Management is requesting approval from the Groundwater and Waste Management Committee to proceed to the EMC for public notice and hearing for amendments to 15A NCAC 2P Leaking Petroleum Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Funds and Regulatory Impact Analysis. These rules are required to be readopted pursuant to General Statute 150B-21.3A by the deadline established by the Rules Review Commission of January 31st, 2021. The changes to the rules have been forwarded to the North Carolina Petroleum and Convenience Marketers for distribution and comments to their members. The Office of State Budget and Management approved the regulatory impact analysis included in Attachment B on December 9th, 2021. The proposed amendments are not expected to impact state or local governments, private households, or public health or the environment, with the exception of providing a benefit through clarification to applicants and state employees and the benefit of adding an informal appeals process. The proposed amendments do not cause a substantial economic impact. The proposed amendments include the following technical changes: updates to information such as department name, address, website, and references, clarification of vague or unclear language, corrections and typographical edits, citation updates, updates to be consistent with statutory language, removal of redundant and unnecessary language. Amendments are also proposed to remove references to the Leaking Petroleum Non-Commercial UST Cleanup Fund, which was phased out to be consistent with changes made to General Statute 143-215.94 under Session Law 2015-241, Section 14.16A. The summary of rule changes. Rules 101 and 103 make technical updates and provide clarification. Rule 102 is proposed for repeal because it's no longer necessary, since copies of the rules can be found on the websites of the Office of Administrative Hearings and the department's website. Rules 201 and 202 make technical updates, provide clarification, remove references to non-commercial USTs, and remove some definitions that are no longer necessary. Rule 301 is proposed for amendment to remove language regarding fees and payments and replace the text with references to the statute where these requirements are outlined. Rule 302 is proposed for amendment to be consistent with current practices under the existing rules, including the documentation that must be submitted and notification for acquiring ownership of a tank. Rule 401 is proposed for amendment to remove references to requirements of the non-commercial tank fund and clarify existing procedures for determination of eligibility and the documentation required to be submitted in an application. Rules 402 through 406 are proposed for amendment to make technical corrections and updates, make the rules consistent with statute requirements, clarify references to the non-commercial fund, clarify existing procedures for determination of eligibility and request for reimbursement, and clarify the documentation required to be submitted in an application for eligibility and request for reimbursement. 407 is proposed for amendment to provide the applicant with an informal appeals process for departmental decisions made under these rules. You can see the proposed schedule for the Groundwater Waste Management Committee. Approval of rule text to go to the EMC is today, January 12th, 2022. EMC approval of rule fiscal note for public comment, March 10th, 2022. 60-day public comment hearing, April 18th through June 17th, 2022. Earliest day for public hearing, May 3rd, 2022. EMC approve hearing office report and fiscal note, adopt rules, July 14th, 2022. RRC final approval of rules, August 18th, 2022. Proposed effective date, September 1st, 2022. The requested action is the department is requesting approval to proceed to the Environmental Management Commission for a public notice and hearing on amendments to 15A NCAC 2P leaking petroleum underground storage tank cleanup funds and regulatory impact analysis. This concludes the slide presentation. Thank you, Chair Bailey and members of the committee. At this time, are there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Randolph. I just wanted a little more information. It's always important to us for the stakeholders to be able to see some of these rules before they go out, because it can be helpful to get their comments ahead of time. You said, I think that you sent this over to, I believe it's called the Petroleum Marketers. When did you send it over, and have you had any informal conversations with them?
Yes, we emailed them to email them this, and we did receive comments. we've been in, we're setting up a time to review that, review their comments with them. It was with one specific area of the having multiple sites, multiple releases on a site, and how the deductible works. That was the only comment that we received so far. And we're, like I said, we're going to set up a time and discuss that and hopefully work through their questions.
Would that actually involve making some changes to this draft that's before us now?
No, I don't believe it would. I could refer to Vance Jackson. He's our section chief. He was the one corresponding with them. Vance, are you able to get on able to speak?
I am. Good morning, Chair Bailey and commission members. Yes, this does involve one specific area regarding deductibles, and it is a question that has come up with the Petroleum Marketers Association in the past. We will be meeting with them to make sure that there is a clear understanding of how those situations where there are multiple releases at a site, and also potentially the process for what happens when a facility is then transferred, ownership is transferred. I do not think that it will change what the rules that we are proposing, because it is the process that we have been using for many years, and has always been a little bit contentious with the petroleum marketers. And I think they simply want to revisit that again and be heard, and we will certainly listen to them. But I do not think that it will change the rules that we were proposing at this point.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go through the roll calls to see if there's any other questions. Commissioner Keen?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Wayne, if there is any adjustment, would that be under 402 through 406 or 407?
Any adjustment, meaning what?
What we just spoke of, Wayne, what we just went over. Like Madam Chair asked, would there be any changes to this draft? And I was just wondering if that concern from the stakeholder, would that fall under 402 to 406? It's in one of your slides, I think third or fourth one back.
I'm sorry,
No, that's,
yeah.
yeah.
I'm looking in the document to see where it is where multiple. I think it may be before that.
Okay.
It might be in 401, the when multiple.
I don't think that one would be.
Yeah.
Not unless it was non-commercial.
Yeah. Well, if you look at 401(2), I believe in cases of multiple releases that commingle into one plume, the deductible is established under the first date of release. That was
Gotcha.
the question.
Yeah, I got you. Thank you.
Okay.
Anything
That
further,
was my
Commissioner Keen?
No, that was my question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Anderson?
No questions.
Commissioner Arata?
No questions, thanks.
Commissioner Kelvington?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Lazorek?
No questions.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Randolph. Do I have a motion to approve to proceed to the EMC on this issue.
This is David, so moved.
Do I have a second?
This is Jenny. I second it, the motion.
Thank you. And I'll go through the roll call again. Commissioner Keen,
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Approve.
Commissioner Arata,
Approve.
Commissioner Kelvington,
Approve.
Commissioner Lazoric.
Approve.
All are in favor of this. It's unanimous, so it will be moving on to the EMC. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
That concludes our action items, and now we're moving on to our informational items. Since our last meeting, I've had discussions about solar panel certifications with the Public Utilities Commission, just to get an idea of this, how the whole system works with putting and approving solar panel farms. And then, of course, we deal with the eventual disposal. So we worked with the public utilities, public staff to discuss a presentation, just give us an oversight of how the whole system works. And so we've asked Robert Josie and Evan Lawrence to give us a presentation. And so I will turn it over. I see Robert Josie is already on our call. And Mr. Josie or Mr. Lawrence, who will start with the presentation. And thank you for being here to answer our questions and do this for us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. I'll begin the presentation with a little legislative history and then an understanding of what is required by the statutes and the commission rules on solar energy facility applications. And then Mr. Lawrence will handle the kind of the numbers portion of our presentation and how many of these facilities there are and where they are in the state. So I will try to share my screen.
And please make sure to introduce yourself and tell us how you interact with the Public Utilities Commission.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I can.
All right, great. So my name is Robert Josie. I am a staff attorney with the public staff, the Utilities Commission public staff, and we are not directly affiliated with the Utilities Commission. We are the consumer advocate that represents utility ratepayers before the commission. And therefore, when it comes to solar facilities in North Carolina, we review the applications and provide a recommendation for approval or disapproval of these facilities. And then the commission will make a determination on whether or not to issue a certificate of public convenience and necessity that allows these facilities to be constructed. So I'll go ahead and get started with our presentation. Let's see here. Try to put it. There we go. Okay, so solar's legislative history in North Carolina basically began in 2007 with Senate Bill 3, which established the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Portfolio Standard, or REPS. And this allowed solar facilities to register as new renewable energy facilities, which would allow the facilities to create and sell renewable energy certificates, or RECs. And these RECs are based on, you get one REC for each megawatt hour of energy generated. This, along with the state and federal tax credits, helped get the solar industry off the ground in North Carolina. The REPS requirements kind of escalated from requiring 3% of for utilities, municipalities, and electric membership corporations to have 3% of their generation from renewable energy starting in 2012, and it is escalated to now requiring electric membership corporations and municipalities to have 10% of their sales from renewable energy and 12.5% for public utilities. In 2017, the legislature approved House Bill 589, which created a competitive procurement for renewable energy, requiring Duke Energy to acquire 2,660 megawatts of renewable energy. And as of now, Duke has acquired approximately 2,000 megawatts and will be trying to acquire the approximately 660 megawatts of energy left over the spring and early summer period. 589 also developed several other solar programs, the Green Source Advantage program, which allowed for universities and military installations to develop solar facilities. The solar rebate program, which provided incentives to residential and non-residential customers to install renewable energy facilities on their property. The solar leasing program, which allowed for companies to lease solar panels to residential and non-residential customers, which had been against the law up until that point, because they would have been considered public utilities under Chapter 62 before House Bill 589. This allows them to apply for to become a solar generator lessor, and they must file an application and be approved by the commission before they can begin leasing to utility customers. I believe we've had 13 companies request approval, and I believe 12 of the 13 have received approval, and we still have one pending. And then the community solar program allowed for a company or a utility to develop a program where a singular community could take advantage of solar facilities. The solar facility in the community solar program could also be owned by the community itself. And this gets us to House Bill 951, which was just passed, I believe in October, which requires the Utilities Commission to take all reasonable steps to achieve a 70% reduction in emissions of carbon dioxide emitted in the state from 2005 levels by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050. And this only applies to public utilities. And then the commission must create this plan, this carbon reduction plan, by the end of 2022 to achieve the goals. We're currently starting up that process here and have had a few filings to determine whether or not we are going to have joint proceedings with South Carolina on this issue. And then to the extent the commission selects solar as part of the generation profile in the carbon plan, 45% of the megawatts will be supplied through power purchase agreements with third parties, and then 55% can be owned by Duke Energy itself. And I can pause there if anyone has any questions on the legislative history.
Are there any questions? Looks like you
Madam
can
Chair,
proceed.
Steve,
Oh.
I do not have any questions at this time.
Thank you. I think you can proceed.
All right. Well, thank you. So I'll just move to what is required for solar facilities to be approved at the Utilities Commission. There are three main types of generation facility approvals. The first one is not much of an approval process. It's a reporting requirement, a report for proposed construction, or an ROPC, which is an informational filing for facilities smaller than 2 megawatts, and my office only reviews those reports if they are larger than 1.5 megawatts. They're exempt. These facilities are exempt from the permitting requirement under 62-110(1)G. This is more of your rooftop solar facilities. Some of those other programs, the community solar programs, may be under 2 megawatts. So, we do not feel it necessary for the legislature did not feel it was necessary for the commission to approve all of these, and there are a lot of them. So they're just a reporting requirement. Once we get over 2 megawatts is what we kind of consider the utility scale solar. And there are two requirements, two different rules that these fall under. R864, which is requires a certificate of public convenience and necessity, or a CPCN, to be approved before construction can commence of these facilities. And the types of facilities you see using this rule and this permitting process are CPRE, or the Competitive Procurement Program facilities, qualifying cogenerator facilities, or QFs as we refer to them, which is from the federal PURPA standards, and then small power producers. The other type of permitting process for a CPCN deals specifically with merchant generating facilities. And the difference between these are really who the facility will be selling the power to. Under R864, we see the facilities mainly selling to a utility, whether it be Duke Energy or Dominion Energy. And then the merchant generating facilities tend to sell at wholesale to commercial off-takers, or into the PJM market, which extends down into northeastern North Carolina. But for discussions for this committee on decommissioning, these review and approval processes can be looked at similarly. And so the ROPC requirements, we just ask for the applicant to file owner information, type and source of power or fuel, description of the buildings, generating capacity, the owner's plan for a sale of the electricity, and the projected annual sales in kilowatt hours. We also would need to know the utility that they will be selling to, or that they will be interconnecting this facility to, the service life of the facility, if the owner intends to earn renewable energy certificates, and then the cost of the facility. For utility scale solar application requirements, again, we ask for the name and the principals, the officers of the company, the annual stockholders report, information on the company that is generating information on the company's other facilities within the CERC region, or the Southeastern Reliability Council region, so within the Southeast. And then information on the facility itself includes the type of fuel, the expected service life, the size, expected construction and operation dates, and the estimated cost. And then we obviously need a map and aerial photo of the site showing the major roads and equipment that will be developed on the facility site, and a list of all federal, state, and local approvals needed for the site and the status of each of those approvals at the time of the application. We usually also ask for a description of the transmission facilities that the facility will interconnect to, and that helps us understand the reliability, if there are any reliability concerns with the facility. One difference, and I see a mistake here. So the one difference between R8 63 and 64, or the merchant generating plants, is for a merchant generating plant, we need to get a description of the needs. So here for that description under 110.1, that should be only for merchant plants under R8 63, not 62. And this normally requires a commission hearing. It can be waived if the parties do not think that one is necessary. There's also usually a public hearing involved if necessary. We recently had one for a wind facility that is going up near Eatonton. And then there is an evidentiary hearing to determine whether or not the facility is needed in accordance with 110.1. Again, we asked for the general plan for the sale of electricity, annual sales, whether the applicant intends to produce renewable energy certificates, and then there is a state clearinghouse review for the compliance with the Environmental Policy Act. Once a certificate is issued, it's subject to revocation if the state or federal or local permits are not obtained or are revoked for any reason, and it will be revoked if the required reports or fees are not filed or paid for, and if the commission concludes that the applicant has provided inaccurate or misleading information at the time they applied for the certificate. The commission can also add any conditions it deems necessary for a particular site. These are looked at on a case-by-case basis, so there are many different factors that could come into play. Normally, it deals with, at least recently, on the cost of the facility, the interconnection facility upgrades that are necessary to interconnect this facility, and whether or not those costs will be at any point ultimately responsible or assigned to ratepayers. And then the annual progress reports are filed until construction is completed, and their information must be updated every 3 years to comply with R8 64, or every 5 years for a merchant generating facility. And if everything must be updated as well, and the commission must be notified if a certificate holder plans to sell or transfer or assign the facility to another owner. And I believe, yep, that completes my portion of the presentation. I can turn it over to Mr. Lawrence to go over the numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Josie. And I'm just going to break and see if there's any questions right now for Mr. Josie's presentation. Commissioner Keen?
I will get to a question here in just a few minutes, Madam Chair, but I would ask that, Robert, if you would set that 13, you said you had 13 currently, 12 has been approved. Well, if Madam Chair, if I could be allowed to go ahead and ask Robert that question now, that'd be okay?
Sure. I just want you to, we're going to be going through the numbers with the next
Okay.
presentation.
Okay,
So
go ahead. That's okay. I'll wait.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Commissioner Anderson, any questions up to this point?
No.
Commissioner Arata,
No questions.
Commissioner Calvington,
Yes, I had just a question to, so it goes through the state clearinghouse for the Energy Policy Act review. What does that entail, the review there?
So what happens is that once a CPCN application is filed, the commission issues a letter to the state clearinghouse, which then sends out the application to a number of different administrative agencies all across the state, I believe. The Department of Cultural Resources looks for any kind of issues that may be present on the stated, site of the facility, as well as DEQ looks at it. Several other, I'm trying to remember exactly all of the different departments and divisions that look at these things. I believe sediment erosion control is one, obviously, and then most of the time the state clearinghouse collects all of the comments and then makes a determination on whether or not everything meets the Environmental Compliance Act and says that no further comments are necessary. If someone does raise an issue, usually we wait until that issue is resolved. Usually my office does not wait for to be given the statutory requirement of when these of the procedural schedule that is set out through statute and rule. We tend to make our recommendation saying, make sure that these issues that state clearinghouse has risen are taken care of before you issue the CPCN, or at least add a condition to the CPCN when issuing it. And I've seen it both ways, where the commission tries to wait until it's taken care of, or they will add a condition to the certificate.
Okay, thank you, Robert. And one other question: have you denied a CPCN because of environmental concerns raised by the communities?
If you say, like, as the community, as in public, the public at large?
Yeah, the public, yes.
Not to my knowledge. We have had some, I believe there's been one or two times where the public has raised an issue in a CPCN public hearing. And, I do not believe we have recommended disapproval of a CPCN application due to that. But I don't know. Evan, are you familiar with any situations?
I believe there was one facility in Beaufort County that the commission, there were a lot of people that had raised concerns relating to environmental issues, and the commission ultimately ended up approving the certificate. But before they approved it, they had issued a recommended order to deny the certificate, mostly because the community's concerns had not been addressed at all. Once those were addressed, people withdrew their complaints, and the commission did ultimately end up accepting it. That's the closest to that I know of. There have only been a couple certificates at all that have been denied, and those, from what I remember, stem from cost issues or no need for the facility for long-term planning, depending on exactly who was requesting.
Okay, Thank you very much.
Oh.
That's all the questions I have.
Okay, just to add to that really briefly, while the commission is, I believe, required to, through rule is required to allow to alert the state clearinghouse of this application, and they look at the environmental issues, that could be raised in the application. I don't think there's anything that the commission is required to look at environmentally in order to determine whether or not an application should be approved.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lazorek, do you have any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Josie. We really appreciate the presentation. This did cover everything that we had talked about before, and I think it gives us some excellent background for what we're working on in my committee right now. So now we'll turn it over to Mr. Lawrence. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Evan Lawrence. I'm an engineer with the Public Staff's Energy Division. I've worked with the public staff for a little over 5 years now, and have reviewed plenty of applications for solar facilities, for CPCNs, ROCs, registrations. For my part of the presentation, I'm going to be going over a lot of the numbers of what we've seen to give you an idea of what we're dealing with here. So on this slide, I have the number of CPCNs that have been issued by year, grouped into 4 different size categories. These CPCNs are only ones that are currently active. So the number we've actually reviewed is much higher than this, and the number of facilities that are actually operating are going to be lower than this, because every facility that's operating has to have a CPCN, but there are some that get their CPCN and then never go in to operation. So any that have a pending application, or any that have been withdrawn or for whatever other reason are not active, are not included in these numbers. So first I'll call your attention to 2012, which is where the first large jump in applications was. That's when the Ropc requirement, first year of compliance, was required. Then in 2014 and 2016, those were the next 2 real high numbers. Those were years where the avoided cost rates changed and were projected to decrease, especially in 2016. So there was a rush of applications to be able to lock in the rates. And so since that time, we've seen a large drop in all sizes of facilities. All right, next slide. So here, to compare to the last slide, we have the actual capacity of the active CPCNs. So if you'll notice, in 2014, there are only around 15 more active CPCN applications, but there is around 2.5 times the capacity. This is primarily because of the increase in applications from larger facilities. In the 2014 timeframe, there was more in the 2 to 5 megawatt range, and in 2016 there were up to 50 plus. So looking at the last slide and comparing it, it makes sense because it takes 10 of the largest facilities of the smallest range to equal the capacity of one of the smallest facilities in the largest range. Right, next slide. So here is a comparison of the CPCNs issued by year and the ROPCs issued by year. The ROPCs are primarily rooftop solar, and as Robert mentioned, after HB 589 was passed, we no longer had to review the ROPCs below 1.5 megawatts. And you know, if you look at how many we got in 2021, that's one reason why there were over 10,000 ROPCs filed in 2021. And so to track that it would just take a lot of manpower, and for these to be rooftop solar facilities are very small in size. So for our purposes, it's an informational filing. For that, the amount of time it would take to review that number, I believe the General Assembly just decided that it wasn't a very good use of our time. And so looking at the number of CPCNs issued by year, I've also included the average nameplate capacity of the applications filed. And you can see after 2016 especially, the size of the facilities started increasing fairly substantially, up to an average of 41 megawatts last year. This is primarily because the larger facilities are now taking up a larger percentage of the applications. All right, next slide. So here, the next few slides, I have included some maps that show the locations of each of the facilities from the last few slides. Here in this 2 to 5 megawatt range, there is a pretty even distribution across the state, with more to the eastern part of the state. And that's going to be common throughout this, since in the eastern part of the state, we have flatter land, more available land for the lower population. And then in the mountains, this map goes as far east as Asheville, because there are no other facilities. Sorry, as far west as Asheville, there are no other facilities west of that, because in the mountains, it's just very difficult to site properly. Next slide, please. So here you can see a pretty big drop off in the number of facilities between the 2 to 5 megawatt range to this one, the 5 to 25 megawatt range. Again, these are more concentrated to the northeast part of the state and Dominion's service territory. Next slide. This is by far the smallest range, this 25 to 50 megawatt range. It's an odd size for developers, where it's usually they develop in this size because of land use constraints. The size, they just can't get the acreage they need for a larger facility, but they want to. There are economies of scale going to a larger facility compared to the 2 to 5 megawatt range. So it's just somewhat of an awkward range for development. Next slide, please. And then here, the 50 plus megawatt range. You see there are a few more here than the 25 to 50 megawatt range to take advantage of the economies of scale. And then these, they still qualify under PURPA up to 80 megawatts, with the exception of in Dominion service territory, where it's up to 25 megawatts, I believe, or 20 megawatts. All right, next slide, please. So here's just a map of all of those previous maps combined. It shows we've got these all over the state. Pretty large distribution of facilities there. All right, next slide, please. Here is showing the counties with the most capacity installed. 17 counties account for nearly half of the capacity in the state. And there's a number of reasons for this, for land use, local local people who want the solar located in their county. In some cases, but it's mainly just the availability of land. Next slide, please. This is just a quick slide showing how the cost and efficiency have changed over time. It goes pretty much as expected. The cost has declined while the efficiency has risen. I want to point your attention to the green dotted line here. That is the crystalline silicon type panel. That is what makes up nearly all of the panels that are installed in the state. Next slide, please. So here are just a few things that would impact the ground coverage of PV panels. Things such as the efficiency of the panels themselves, installers' preferences, the local terrain, desired output profile, are a few examples. Then next slide, please. So the desired output profile is probably the most important piece in that. The developer wants to be able to reach their full generation capacity as fast as possible and stay there as long as possible, because when you're putting energy out on the grid, that's how you make your money. This can be achieved simply by building the facility larger than what the nameplate capacity is, and then limiting the output onto the grid. So here I've got an example of the developer wants to build an 80 megawatt facility. So after conversion losses from the DC panels, so solar facilities produce direct current or DC energy, but our grid takes AC energy. So there has to be inverters that have conversions from DC to AC. Then there's transformers that have the right voltage. So after these conversions, they may need 95 megawatts DC of panels. Then they'll look and see and do an economic analysis, and they might see that it's cost beneficial to install an additional 10 megawatts of panels and equipment so that they can ramp up faster in the mornings, stay there longer in the afternoons. Or they could see that it's beneficial to install some sort of energy storage system. With tracking, solar panel tracking mechanisms becoming cheaper, this is becoming a little less prevalent. We saw this a lot. They'd use fixed tilt panels, which wouldn't move at all. They'd face one direction all year. And the single axis tracking, since that technology has become cheaper, it essentially does the same thing as over panel. It just tracks the sun more, so it hits it more directly. So earlier facilities may have this more so than a later facility. All right, next slide, please. And so here is just to give some examples, the real world examples of what we've seen. These are all Dominion-owned energy, solar energy facilities here in North Carolina. So looking at the first 6 facilities, they're all 5 megawatt facilities. So they're all the same capacity. They're also all around the same acreage. There is some variation there, up to 7 megawatts between the smallest and largest, or 7 acres, sorry, between the smallest and largest. But then the number of panels varies from just over 21,000 panels to over 58,000 panels. So that's primarily, that would be because of the efficiency of the panels. The they might have had some panels already available. They might have looked at the cost and saw that it was more cost effective to go with a less efficient panel. Then, looking at the acreage, again, that 6 acres is common. 6 acres per megawatt is common. So looking at those 5 megawatt projects, the size of that with over 2 times the panels, smaller ones are just going to be more spread out. They're going to have more row or more space in between rows of panels. They might be optimized a little bit differently. There are a few things that can go into the spacing. Then there's 2 larger facilities that we see, 14 acres per megawatt, which is a pretty big jump, over double that. With larger facilities, you can have issues because they need more land. So there's going to be more land that is unavailable to put panels on. One, you might have swamps in the area that you can't, or other wetlands that you can't disturb, or they have different ways to optimize the facilities to get the least cost for the most energy out of them. So I believe this really shows that it can be tricky to estimate just looking at the size, things such as acreage or the equipment that's there, just because there are a number of factors that can go into it, and it's really up to each individual developer as preferences and site optimization, how they go about it. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for the opportunity, and be open for questions.
Yes, I forgot to put a questions ending slide on our presentation. That shows you how long it's been since I've made a presentation like this.
No problem at all. Thank you both for all the work that you put into this. It helps us understand the magnitude of what we're being faced with in the decommissioning part of it. And also we're looking at the financial assurance requirements too. Other parts of the department are doing that right now. So I'd like to open it up for questions. We'll start with Commissioner Keene.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I really appreciate this overview. Very knowledgeable in where you have been as far as mapping and regional identifying those particular in Eastern North Carolina. But I guess the procedure, I guess they would go through an application. I wanted to ask, I guess maybe both of you, is through the clearinghouse piece and going back into the 13 that's been applied for, and maybe the 12 that has been approved just recently, because of I guess efficiency and the output is what they're looking for, the investor. But I didn't see anywhere where it was predetermined on the waste part of it. As Madam Chair, I would follow up with what you just said. Is I guess our lane is to consider the product at the end. And you had mentioned earlier, I think, Robert, that there's no regulations when you have to check all the boxes as an applicant. What is the total tonnage or the weight of the panels? And again, has it been, or can it be predetermined of what the total waste will be at the end of the term of its use? And I guess, Madam Chair, that's my concern or my question as a committee member. listening to all of this, is there a way that we can get that answered up front in the process of the applicant?
Mr. Josie or Mr. Lawrence, is any of that covered in the application process for you?
No, it's not covered specifically, particularly in those terms. I do think that, as this, some of the slides that Mr. Lawrence has shown, how many panels are in each of these facilities, can give you an idea as far as the weight. Sure, it varies depending on the age of the panel. They are getting lighter and lighter as they get more efficient, is my understanding. One thing we have to look at, we're not exactly sure at this point in time. We have contract terms for the land, for the sale of the electricity, but that doesn't mean at the end of the contract term for either of those, the facility will necessarily be decommissioned. We have not really reached a point in the solar development within the state to know what is going to happen, if the contracts will be renewed, whether the panels will exceed their expected life span, whether the company will, exchange older panels for more efficient panels and continue, the life of the facility itself. So there are a lot of questions when it comes to how many panels will, and how much will they weigh, how many panels will there be at the end of the life expectancy of a facility. As we've said, the capacity, we can look at the capacity of a facility, and Evan, I'm not sure you can explain this a little better than I can, whether or not I don't know if they say what type of panel. I don't believe they say what type of panel they are putting in when they're applying for the facility. A lot of that is, sometimes that's determined a little later on. So that's a long answer to say I don't think we have those answers for what the decommissioning, the size of the decommissioning of each facility is going to look like.
Right, and to Robert's last point, or one of the last points there, while they are required to give a description of the facilities and equipment used, the CPCNs are usually applied for pretty early. We're seeing a lot now come in for renewal, which is if they don't start construction within 5 years, then the CPCN has to be renewed. And we've seen several come in now. So, their CPCNs were approved 5 years ago, and they might have, if they're close to starting construction, they would have ordered equipment. But if they haven't ordered the equipment yet, even the panel technologies, the efficiencies have changed over the last 5 years. So while in that initial application, after, my point is they do a lot of optimization so that equipment may change from that point. So we usually don't. Some developers do provide it, but most, I would say, do not.
Madam Chair, if I could just follow up real quickly with a comment then, and I'll be finished. My concern here is the end game, and I use the example of a battery. You turn in a battery, you get credit for the battery, you get another battery. Size of the batteries are different in cars than they are in batteries in a flashlight, but it's still a battery, and it still has an end game to it. So are these panels. They can be effective, big or small. The technology is there, but the end product to be predetermined on how that waste is going, or that piece of equipment is going to be buried or done away with or incinerated or however you want to get rid of it, is a concern, I think, of the committee and the EMC. And these concerns have been brought up, and it's a concern that it's not determined up front of what we can anticipate at the end of 20 years, what this is going to be and where it is going to be done away with. Is it going to be done away in the region that it's been sitting for 20 years, or is it going to be shipped out? And there's an economic impact analysis that I think which would be favorable to those people, how they're going to ship it out, how they're going to transport it out of state, in state. And that's a concern, Madam Chair. And I just appreciate so much of what I've learned so far during these two presentations. And I appreciate them coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Keene. I think those are excellent questions because we're trying to quantify what we'll have ahead of us. I mean, we've heard about some recycling and reuse of these panels, but I think this is a good start in understanding just where these are, which appear to be all over, although they are concentrated in those counties, and what we've got ahead of us. So I just think this was such a helpful presentation. We'll go to Commissioner Anderson now. Any questions or comments?
No comment.
Commissioner Arata.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. I have one question. I think it might be for Robert. Earlier in the presentation, it was mentioned that there might be some coordination with South Carolina. I was wondering if you could just provide a little more detail about what's being contemplated.
Sure. At the moment, Duke Energy, and this is dealing specifically with the carbon plan and the development of that plan. Obviously, Duke Energy has a lot of facilities that supply energy to both states and in both states. So Duke is they're required to file an integrated resource plan giving their 30-year outlook in both states. And they're trying to combine, I think, South Carolina's IRP process with the carbon plan process and have just basically allow them to only, go on, present this information and have it litigated once. There's a lot of people against that idea, and we have not taken a stance on it yet. So it's a developing process, but yeah, we'll see where it goes. But that's basically what's happening. It's our carbon plan, it's their IRP, and the process, whether or not Duke needs to have two different types of plants and two different proceedings.
Great, thank you. That's helpful.
Commissioner Kelvington.
Yes, first of all, I would like to thank you for the excellent presentations and the information you provided. It's very helpful. The one question I did have is if you track what percentages of the solar facilities are on the land owned by the developer versus leased land facilities, and if there is some accountability that the developer has at the end of the facility life of the lease to hold them responsible for the solar facility, or would that be the responsibility of the landowner?
They do provide the lease agreements with the application. And I would say, I don't think we keep track of who owns the land that the facility's on, but I would say the vast majority, probably well over 90%, or land that is leased. And as I said, they do provide those lease agreements. We do try to keep up with them during the CPCN application process. However, we do not look to see if there is a decommissioning plan or anything in place during that process. We just want to make sure that they've leased the land that the facility is proposed to be on, and they have site control. They are required to show site control of all of the land in the interconnection process that they have to go through with the utility, whose facilities they're trying to interconnect to. And I do believe that there are certain counties that may require a decommissioning plan in their approval process for the facility, but to be honest, I'm not sure how many or which county require that.
Okay. Okay. And also, the information about the size of the facility. What is the largest acreage, or how many acres were you looking at for some of these facilities?
Evan, I'm not sure if you know offhand. I know that changes every time we get an application.
Right, I'm sure it does.
But I think the largest facility we've seen to date, there is currently one who is seeking approval that's 325 megawatts. So if it's 6 acres, I don't have an application in front of me, but if it's 6 acres, a megawatt, you can extrapolate that out.
So. Okay, thank you very much. And that's all the questions I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Lazorek, do you have any questions?
Yes, I was interested in the pattern of applications and that surge during the rate lock period, and then was just wondering, compared to the map, what % of applications don't go on to turn into a functioning facility, if that makes sense? And is that a useful number? Like, are those open applications ones that can still be built, or when they receive the application, do they have a time limit by the time it has to become functional?
So I think, go ahead, Evan.
There is a requirement that if they don't begin construction within 5 years, then the CPCN expires, but they are able to renew it. And then I believe it's another 5 years after the renewal. But then, of course, the older the active CPCN is, the more likely it is that I'd say it has been built, because developers look through their portfolios and figure out which sites they're doing, and then withdraw the facilities, the CPCNs that they no longer plan to develop, or either the site has already been developed, which would mean the application just stays active. I believe around, I can't remember the numbers. I think we have around between 7,000 and 8,000 megawatts of solar in North Carolina. So I'd say maybe around half of the previous applications would be built. And moving forward, though, it's probably more likely that when someone applies, that facility will be constructed, just because rates are favorable. So they're not just trying to get the applications in to lock in a rate. They're getting the application in to develop a facility. But I'd say that 50% number is just a guess, though. I'm not really even sure how much weight I'd put into that. It's really tough to tell.
I don't know where your numbers were pulled from, or how hard it would be to add that column, to that application, the table with all the applications, to have which ones actually went on to be completed. I mean, it'd be nice to track that, but if that's a huge lift to add that, then
right. Okay. Right. And part of the reason, I should have mentioned this starting out, part of the reason why I just went with the number of active applications is because the applicants have no requirement to let us know that the facility is in operation. And so that number, there are some things, like there are EIA, Energy Information Administration, I believe. They do track some I don't know exactly how they track the information though, so I don't know how accurate it is, whether it's just through self-reporting or whether they go out and verify the information. But I believe that's the only organization I've seen that does any sort of tracking for active projects or operating projects.
And just to add to that, in the past, some of these facilities would apply for a CPCN, receive it, and they still hadn't gone through Duke Energy's or PJM interconnection study process to determine how much it was going to, whether or not they could interconnect to the utility grid, and if so, how much it was going to cost to interconnect into the grid. And sometimes when those costs are too high, they decide not to build the facility. Duke has recently reformed their study queue process, which is supposed to provide a better idea for facilities when they're interconnecting to the queue or interconnecting into the grid. And so we're hoping that that process and our application process will align a little better in the future. So facilities requesting CPCNs and that are granted CPCNs will eventually interconnect to the grid. So those numbers should be more accurate in the future. That's our hope.
Commissioner Lazork, do you have any follow-up questions?
Just based on that last question, what other major players are there besides Duke Energy that's an issue? Like I know in my local area, it's a cooperative extension, and so it's a much smaller group.
Well, and Evan can correct me if I'm wrong. Usually, Duke Energy or Dominion Energy own the transmission network and the grid, and therefore, when you're interconnecting, at least at the transmission level, and I believe at the distribution level as well, those still have to go through those utility study process. And since Dominion is part of PJM, the PJM market, PJM actually studies all the facilities within Dominion's territory.
And I will add that the utilities themselves don't really own many of these projects just because their requirements to be able to build are a little bit different than a third party. The vast majority of these are third party owned and operated facilities.
That's all my questions. Thanks.
Thank you. So it looks like we have a lot of questions going forward. That one of my questions is, do you see, at least at the Public Utilities Commission level, that some more of this information might be requested so that we can quantify some of these things? Based on listening to our questions, because we're looking at decommissioning and quantifying, and has this thing even been constructed or not? Do you foresee any of that being changed in the future?
It's tough to say. I know, the main focus for our staff and our office and the commission is making sure that the grid is safe and reliable, and that when these facilities are attempting to interconnect, that they are not, their interconnection costs do not trickle down to ratepayers, causing rates to go up, unless there is a significant benefit, and making sure that there is a need for the electricity in the future. So it's tough to say whether or not the commission would be on board with requiring additional information for this purpose. But we are currently, and I probably should have mentioned this before, we are currently working on some revisions to the application process now. So, it is a possibility that that could be something that's added.
And when you say for the application process, specifically for solar panels or just generally?
So we are working on it. So these rules do not, R8, 63 and 64 are not specific to solar facilities. They are all facilities, all fuel facilities. That's one of the reasons we ask in the application, what is the power source of the fuel for this facility? Particularly when you have merchant plants under R863, in the past, the rules were written for large gas plants originally. And those are the types of merchant plants we would see, I wouldn't say large, but medium-sized, gas plants that are, selling into a market or selling to Duke Energy. So those two rules are in the process of being revised to help with, what we've seen now more. Almost all of the applications are now solar facilities, but we will see some wind facilities as well under those rules.
Okay, thank you. I just want to thank you once again for a very complete presentation that addressed what we were discussing as we planned this together. It's exactly what I wanted, and I think it has been of great help to everybody on our committee. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And since I don't have that last slide giving our contact information, I'll be happy to provide that to staff and they can send it out if anyone has any follow-up questions.
Sure, we appreciate that because we might have more questions. You might be sorry that you offered, but we're trying to tackle these issues and get as much information as we can to understand what we need to do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Bailey, this is Michael Scott. Can I make a comment or just wait till the end of the committee meeting? Whatever.
No, I'd love it if you'd make a comment now. Thank you.
Yeah, just would like to also thank Robert and Evan for the very informative presentation. As you remember, Chair Bailey and the other committee members, our Division of Waste Management presented, one item as an informational item last committee meeting on the potential for solar panels to be considered as a universal waste. And we had a lot of great questions at that committee meeting. Chair Bailey worked diligently to kind of coordinate this update with Robert and Evan, which I think is really instrumental for our dialogue and the work of this committee moving forward. I just wanted to point back briefly, as Robert touched on some of the legislation. We did work with the EMC, meaning DEQ, on House Bill 329, which was entitled The Activities Conducted to Establish a Regulatory Program for the Management and Decommissioning of Renewable Energy Equipment. That was the report that we did submit from the EMC and DEQ back in January of 2021. A lot of great questions from Commissioner Keene. That specific report, I think, did touch on some great information that we can go back and reference as far as the number of North Carolina counties that have decommissioning requirements. I believe that number is around 55 counties, Commissioner Keene, and about 22 of those 55 that actually already require financial assurance for decommissioning. So as a lot of work of this committee, Chair Bailey, Robert and Evan, focuses on the endpoint when some of these facilities may need to be decommissioned if they're not repowered, knowing that we're several years out, maybe 7 years out, around 2030. This information will really help guide those decision processes. And as Robert also noted, I just wanted to tie in also to House Bill 951, Chair Bailey. We are working on that as DEQ. It is titled, it's a requirement for DEQ to submit a plan regarding financial assurance resources for the decommissioning of utility scale solar projects to the General Assembly. And that's due March 1st, 2022. So DEQ is actively working on gathering information, reviewing other state requirements, current North Carolina county requirements on decommissioning and financial assurance, as we all look at this growing field of solar in North Carolina, and what we really think is the work of the commission and your committee, Chair Bailey, what things look like at the end of the process, meaning decommissioning and what the requirements may be. So I think those two pieces of legislation are critical. We're not going to have a formal informational item on that tomorrow at the full commission. We may do that later this year, depending on your feedback, Chair Bailey and Chair Smith, but look forward to continuing this discussion. And once again, thank you to Robert and Evan.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful, and everybody needs to appreciate this is an upcoming issue that it has to be worked on. We've got a lot of time to go ahead and work through these issues too. We're ahead of our schedule, I think, with this so far. And I did just notice that Chairman Smith is on the line. I'm sorry if I didn't ask you for your comments sooner, but I'm not that good with seeing who's on the call or not. So Chairman Smith, do you have any comments?
Oh, thanks. Just a really brief comment. And I think Michael touched on one part of the comment, which is that we do have time and additional avenues to work on this with the upcoming report on financial assurance, and then can also look back at last year's report on decommissioning. And I think one of the interesting pieces of information in the report from the Utilities Commission public staff, and again, thank them for that, is that the majority of the projects out there that are utility scale came, it appears, from 2014 forward. So the surge in applications began around 2014. So allowing for additional time for construction and getting however many of those were approved actually into operation. We're still at a point where these facilities are fairly new. And so we do have time to work through questions about what happens at the end of life for these facilities. So I think it's great that the committee's working on this early in that lifespan, so that we have time to think through the implications and understand what other agencies and local governments are doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair Smith. I think we can move on to the agenda where we have listed the future committee interests. We don't have a presentation on these. I just want to note that we've asked about the status of the IMAC requests that are pending. So that will be coming up in the future. And if any of the committee members or Chair Smith thinks we need to add other things to our agenda, I'm always open for suggestions. So I'd like to move on to director's remarks, and Director Scott has already made some remarks, but you are welcome to continue with any other discussion.
Thank you, Chair Bailey. I don't have extensive additional comments. Just thanks for the committee's attention to our two action items today from the UST program and solid waste program. We'll keep you informed, Chair Bailey and Chair Smith. We're still looking at the update coming back on the universal waste piece related to solar, potentially at the March meeting. We'll keep you informed on that regarding the fiscal analysis that's underway. Other than that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Is Director Smith on the line, and would he like to make comments?
Yes, hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I just want to take a second and recognize Rick Bullock. He's the section chief with the Water Quality Groundwater Resources section, and he is retiring at the end of this month after 22 years with the division. Rick has worked on a host of our groundwater resource projects. He was a Raleigh Regional Office Assistant Supervisor. He's got extensive work with the UIC program and the monitoring network and coastal plain capacity use area issues. Lots of work with data management and technical support. And he's been really critical or instrumental in the CCR work, the department's effort for coal ash basin closure. So he's just done a whole lot of work with the division and just we will certainly miss him. I just want to take a second and recognize him and congratulate him and wish him well in his retirement. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for recognizing him. It sounds like he's a valuable resource that we'll be losing with all of that experience. So thank you very much. I think that's the end of our agenda. Thank you, everybody. I don't have anything to add, so we can adjourn the meeting.